Hey, it's Voidbrand. So, I wasn't planning on doing a video on Gothic 1 for this channel, but after I finished the game, I felt the itch to do something for this channel. So, here's my unstructured, rambly, non-scripted video on Gothic. Released in 2000 and developed by the good old Piranha Bytes company and published by Xicat Interactive in North America and THQ Nordic in the EU. I actually never heard of this game even when it came out, and in fact, Gothic 1 was not my first Gothic game. Gothic 2 was, and it wasn't until after I played that game, after seeing a physical copy in stores, that I managed to find myself a physical copy on eBay. Back then, Gothic 1 and 2 weren't on sale in a digital format on Steam or GOG or anything like that. But I remember playing Ultima 9 for this channel, and during the stream I mentioned that Gothic 1 and 2 is Ultima 9 done correctly. I do remember some forum posts quite a long time ago discussing things along that vein, and when you're playing Gothic 1 and 2 and you've played Ultima 9, you can get a sense that the developers are probably huge fans of the Ultima franchise. The game itself is extremely immersive along the veins of an Ultima 7, in which each object in the game is interactable. Characters can sit in chairs, sleep in beds, each character has their own schedules to keep, their own tasks to perform, and their own personalities. Combine this with the interesting setting, the great ambience, and a wonderful soundtrack composed by Kai Rosenkranz, and you got yourself a recipe for one of the most immersive and engaging computer role-playing games of all time. I consider Gothic 1 and 2 to be some of my favorite games, alongside Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Deus Ex, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and Ultima 7, of course. That's just off the top of my head. The setting of the game is that basically, King Robar of Murtana is engaged in a war with the bloodthirsty orcs. The war itself isn't going too well, so he throws every prisoner into a colony to force them to mine magical ore in order to craft magical swords for his army. And when I mean every prisoner, I mean everyone, no matter how small or how big the crime. To prevent any hope of escape, the king conscripts the best mages of the kingdom to construct a magical barrier around the colony. However, something went wrong during the casting, trapping everyone inside it, the guards, the prisoners, and even the mages, with the prisoners taking advantage of the chaos to gain some form of freedom through the murder of their captors. As a result, the king, desperate for magical swords for his army, strikes a deal with the new ore barons of the old camp. He'll give them food, supplies, weapons, equipment, anything, even women, if the prisoners give him the magical ore he needs for his war. During this exchange, a prisoner is about to be sent into the colony, along with a female prisoner, as well as the supplies required for the deal that's struck between the ore barons and the king. Right as the prisoner is about to be sentenced, a mage interrupts him and gives the prisoner a letter for the Magicians of Fire. He agrees after being promised some great rewards for doing this service, and as a result, he's tossed in the barrier. After dragging himself out of the water all drenched and soaked, he's punched right in the face by one of the guards of the old camp. Welcome to the colony. Afterwards, the main character is saved by another character from the old camp named Diego. He gives him a lot of information and even urges him to join the old camp, despite the fact that someone from the old camp just punched the main character right in the face. But to explain the setting just a little bit more, there are 3 camps in the Valley of Mines. There's the old camp in the center, the new camp in the northwest, and the swamp camp in the southeast. The old camp has a clear hierarchy, with diggers being at the bottom, shadows being agents of Gomez, the ore baron, and guards who extract protection money from diggers as well as you, and if you don't pay, they will get someone to beat you up until you eventually relent. The new camp, however, doesn't have any of the rules of the old camp, believing freedom above all else and preferring to use the ore gathered in order to find a way out of the colony. The swamp camp, also known as the sect camp, believe that their way to freedom is by worshipping a god called the Sleeper. This is probably one of the most unique camps in the game because the swamp camp allows you to learn sleeper magic, and they have a unique theme where they smoke, well, weed. Or to be more accurate, swamp weed. Yes, there's weed in this game, and when you smoke them, you actually get experience from them, which is pretty funny. But anyways, you can choose to join one of 3 camps, and me personally, I always joined the old camp for a reason I'll get to later on. And this is the unique feature of Piranha Bytes game, where you're pretty much forced to join either one of the camps in order to progress in the game, get better armor, better weapons, and learn new skills from each of the trainers. But above all, it's the way to let the player know that there's no way to get over any challenge basically on your own, even though that might be a pretty cool path in a Piranha Bytes game. But in each Piranha Bytes game, you basically have to choose one of 3 guilds in almost every game, if not all. But the best thing about Gothic 1 and 2 is honestly the character progression. You start off as an absolute weakling in all the Gothic games, well, at least Gothic 1 and 2. Your character basically has no skills in practically anything and doesn't even know how to swing a sword properly. In fact, you don't even start at level 1, you start at level 0. That's how weak you are. If it weren't for Diego's intervention at the beginning of the game, I'm pretty sure the main character would have died. Other than that, the character is actually pretty much a blank slate and actually doesn't even have a name. Well, he does have a name, but the joke is that every time he attempts to introduce himself, characters will say something like, "I don't care what your name is," or "Your name is insignificant."
I'm Diego. I'm not interested in who you are.
Who dares to disturb me in my studies?
My name is...
I don't wish to know your name. It's insignificant.
But the reason why I say the character progression is so rewarding in this game is that eventually, as you gain levels and skill points, raise your strength, learn how to swing a sword properly, know how to use a crossbow, you'll eventually get to the point where you're able to go ahead and venture into areas that used to kill you in one hit, as well as basically becoming the god of war towards the end of the game where most enemies are now afraid of you instead of the other way around. But the combat, and by extension the controls, which I haven't even talked about yet, plays out the way you're seeing it right now, where you can enact combos, attack left and right, dodge, and even parry. The best way to describe the controls of the combat as well as this game is that, well, back when I played this entire game with just the keyboard. In order to open up a chest, for example, you have to hold down the action button, for me that's the left mouse button, and then press the up button to open up the chest. It's the same way with combat where if you want to attack an enemy, you hold down the left mouse button, or the action button, and then you can enact combos pressing the forward button, as well as attacking side to side using the left and right movement keys. It sounds a little awkward, but after a while you do get used to it. It's actually kind of intuitive. It's actually a pretty unique way to play a video game. In fact, I don't think there's any other video game that controls the way Gothic does. And Gothic 1 isn't a difficult game by any means, but the beginning stages of the game it can be challenging, mostly because you pretty much have nothing, and trying to accumulate magical ore in order to trade for better weapons and equipment is a bit of a struggle unless you already know where all the best spots are. So unless you're attempting a self-inflicted challenge like an Iron Man mode, then yeah, Gothic 1 is not a bad game by any means. In fact, if you love exploration, then you can actually eliminate pretty much most monsters even in Chapter 1. When I revisited this game for the first time in over 10 years, I realized that the assets and areas are laid out pretty well. The only problem is that this game has an enormous amount of backtracking. You can mitigate this with acrobatics or haste potions, and I highly recommend getting haste potions because it makes you run much, much faster. Perfect for being able to traverse long distances without losing your patience. Eventually though, you'll get runes that help you fast travel to one of the camps, which is an absolute breath of fresh air, believe me. Going back to the story a little bit though, your goal is to basically find a way out of the Valley of Mines and destroy the magical barriers surrounding the colony. In the beginning stages, you basically have to join one of the camps, and if you join the old camp, you become a shadow and then a guard. If you join the new camp, you become a rogue and then a mercenary. And if you join the swamp camp, you become a novice and a Templar. When I played this game for the very first time, I always joined the new camp, became a rogue and a mercenary, because I always thought the idea of pure freedom even within a prison colony was more interesting to me. Not to mention the fact that you do get punched in the face by one of the guards of the old camp as soon as you step into the colony. But regardless of which camp you join, your next task in Chapter 2 is to go visit the swamp camp and basically spy on them. The swamp camp, as I said, believe that their only path out of the colony is by worshipping an ancient god called the Sleeper. But funnily enough, a lot of the novices who join basically join just because they want to smoke swamp weed. But as you get farther into the game, you find out pretty quickly that the god known as the Sleeper is not a benevolent deity, and yeah, go figure, because one of the quests involves you grabbing items called the Focus Stones, which were used to construct the barrier around the colony. There's one instance where a Focus Stone is in possession of a novice, and he basically goes crazy and is tasked with killing you. It happens on 2 occasions throughout the game.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
You also found out the reason why that there was a disruption in the casting of the magical barrier is because of the Sleeper. You can probably see where I'm going with this. So basically, in order to destroy the magical barrier, you have to banish the Sleeper. The only problem is that in order to get to his temple, you have to find a way through the Orc Town. And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can just slice and dice your way through, or find ingredients for an item called the Ulumulu, created by the Orc Tarok in the free mines of the New Camp. Even though this game released in 2001, I find it really cool that even though the orcs are basically the main antagonists, you do meet a couple of friendly ones along the way. One of them being Urshak, who is actually being attacked by his fellow orcs because they're under the influence of the Sleeper. He's basically the one that tells you how to get to the Orc Town through the use of the Ulumulu. Basically, the orcs there won't attack you if you have the item equipped, which is pretty handy if you want to just get past them without fighting, though you do miss out on quite a bit of experience if you care about getting the most XP possible. But since I'm already spoiling this game, I should mention that the reason why I always join the old camp is that basically, the Ore Barons end up murdering all the fire magicians. Turns out that the mine that the Ore Barons were using to mine ore for the king ended up getting flooded because one of the diggers struck a vein that tapped into an underground river. Being in a desperate situation and seeing that if they have no ore, they're not going to get any goods from the king, they decided to go ahead and raid the free mines of the new camp. And of course, the fire magician protested, and as a result, Gomez, the leader of the old camp, ended up ordering his guards to murder them. And if you joined the old camp for this playthrough, you're basically branded a traitor because you've been talking too much with people in the new camp. So basically, you're better off joining the old camp anyway because you end up becoming a mercenary after this event of the story. But other than that, there's really not much to speak of about the story and the fact that it's not really the high points of the game. The high point of the game is, to me, is the exploration, questing, immersion, character progression. All those things combined together create for a very immersive experience, except for the fact that if there's a downside, there's a lot of backtracking in this game, as I said. For example, with the Ulumulu, you have to get 4 ingredients and have Tarok the Orc craft it for you. There's a few quests in this game that are like this, where you have to go backtrack from point A to point B over and over again. It can really wear on your patience, so I highly recommend getting those haste potions that I talked about earlier. But going back to the immersion topic a little bit, as you get better leveling up, getting weapons and armor, and earning skill points for your character, you can use those skill points to train in various skills such as one-handed, two-handed, bow, crossbow, sneaking, pickpockets, open locks, and even learning how to take trophies from enemies, as well as acrobatics and increasing your strength and dexterity. The take trophy skill is something I actually recommend getting as soon as possible if you want to be able to skin animals, take their teeth, and take their claws. If you learn this as early as possible, then you're able to earn the maximum amount of magical ore in order to trade weapons, armor, and supplies with the various merchants in all the camps. It's not necessary, especially if you know where all the rich spots are, but for me, I always take the trophy skill because I like to be able to skin animals in order to trade as much items as possible with the merchants. But other than that, when you attempt to learn new skills in one-handed and two-handed, you may remember me saying that the main character does not even know how to swing a weapon. He's pretty untrained. But as you rank up in one-handed or two-handed, he starts swinging his weapon with a bit more skill. One of my favorite things about training skills in this game is that they don't just give you the skill. The NPCs in this game will actually describe in detail on how to swing a weapon or even how to skin an animal or take teeth, which really adds to the immersive factor of this game. I will say that since the game aged, I find the visuals actually have held up rather well. I didn't bother with any graphic mods or anything like that, but there was one issue with this game that I had where all the textures in the game, like the furniture, started turning green, blue, or I think pink at times. It was very jarring and I was trying to figure out why that was happening, and it turns out there's a dungeon in this game called the Skeleton Tower, and after I finished that dungeon, that's when I started to notice all the green textures throughout the game, so for my fix was basically just revert a previous save. Someone online on Reddit said they fixed it by downloading a graphic pack, which they didn't even bother explaining which is, yeah, very helpful. But anyways, yeah, reverting a previous save fixed it, and I was worried also because people were saying it could be caused by save corruption from some other issue which wasn't related to me at all. But anyways, the game has aged. It is very, very fun, but it is janky. Very, very janky. They call it Eurojank, and that's not a mark on the game. The jank is actually part of the charm, so it's meant with a lot of respect. There's a lot of funny moments because of the physics of the game that you just can't help but laugh at it sometimes.
Listen, boy, I know you want to get out of here, but forget it. You better forget the thought of escape. I saw the faces of those who tried to get out of the barrier.
What
Don't make the same mistake.
Whoa.
The barrier will stop everybody.
I don't want to dig in the mine for the next 10 years of my life.
But I will say that despite the fact that this game is well over 20 years old, it is still very, very much worth playing. And I think even if the Gothic I remake gets released, I still think this is going to be the ideal way to play Gothic, because I don't believe the remake is going to be any good. I hate to sound cynical, but hey, that's how I am with modern games nowadays. But anyways, that's all I have to say about Gothic I. Thanks for watching. I wonder if you can actually go down there. I don't think you can. Something down there. Curious.
Avatar, arise from your slumber. The Guardian has invaded Britannia.